people who were in marketing and sales and accounting and product and all of that, IT, weren't really subject to that level of monitoring. And that's really what's very interesting, is because it was our normal and now it's being rolled out, and the reactions are fascinating, and I think long overdue. Because people don't like being surveilled. I mean, honestly, nobody ever liked it. Nobody ever enjoyed it. It was a condition of employment, right? And that's where I think that we really have to be aware of what we're sacrificing when we're surveilling, and that is trust.
So Nola, thank you so much for your time today. You are, I should start with congratulations. You have just recently been named a top voice for LinkedIn. So first question, how are you doing?
I'm good. Top voice is actually interesting. I will find out more this week what it really entails, but it's not very clear how the criteria are set. So I'm actually getting a lot of pushback from people because they're like, why'd you get it? And like, I don't actually have a huge following. I have about 6,000 followers, right? So compared to some of the other people that I do know who've been on LinkedIn and active as ever, I have a very small following. So it's a fascinating thing because you don't actually know why you got it. Like, what did I do differently than I'd done other years, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of, it's thrilling, but it's humbling at the same time. So
There you go. And being humble is a bit of a theme with posts that you when you talk about leadership and stuff like that. We might get to that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, so you are you're a specialist and a consultant in everything that has to do with remote work, hybrid working, leadership for teams. I want to talk about that. But before we get that, I think one of the last posts you did was basically telling everybody like, hey, hope you get some awe this weekend. So did you find some awe last week?
Yeah, well, I study meditation, right? I do meditation actually with my coach, who's also a top voice. The fact we both got it this year is kind of fun. Her name's Carrie Twigg, and part of what meditation mindfulness really is just noticing the world around you, right? And it's funny because once you start really paying attention, it's like the glimmer of frost on the trees or on the sidewalk, or how the moonlight hits, or even sometimes if you're just driving and just the way the sunlight is coming through the trees, like you can have these immense moments of happiness. Nothing else in your life has changed,
right?
But because you have that instinct to notice beauty and just look for things that awe you, you can be immensely happy. It's really, really fascinating to me. And you can't force it. It just happens. But it's that awareness and keeping your eyes open, your mind open. I find it's a difference. So that was just a little post where it's like, look for awe. Remember, it doesn't take long, like 5 minutes, right?
Awesome. So I'm going to use that as a very forced segue to go to, because you said like, oh, this happens to me when I'm doing, walks and see something, small and that stands out. Myself and many other people went or forced themselves to go more often on walks when the pandemic hit and we were all working from home. And the only thing, depending on what kind of building you were in, what kind of neighborhood or what kind of town or city you were living in, for a lot of people, going for a quick stroll was the only way to kind of get away from work when we were all, in lockdown and working from home, at least those of us that could work from home. So I want to ask you about some of the stuff that you're seeing, because I've always worked in technology, and in looking in hindsight, I could have always worked remote, but often I was close enough to an office that I would often go to the office every day, then had to work from home for 2 years straight, and that definitely changed things. What was a very clear change was that I went from basically a 9 to 5 with a bunch of meetings and lots of travel in between. I went to at best a 9 to 5 with 20-30-minute calls back to back, no more break, and all of that was made possible through my technology tools and so on. How when we think about remote work and hybrid work, and we see another evolution coming with all these tools that are exploding, and there's a new AI fueled tool every time we blink our eyes. Like, what are you seeing now that a lot of organizations some have tried to enable a hybrid workforce, some have tried to roll back the clock. What are you seeing as some clear trends when it comes to hybrid and remote work today versus a couple of years ago?
So it's interesting because I actually come from a customer service background. So I was in call centers for the majority of my career. And so I've always honestly had back-to-back calls. It's been a thing. That was my normal.
Right.
And along with customer service also comes a lot of monitoring and surveillance, right? Because your calls are recorded. It's not a new thing at all. And what honestly is happening, and what I've seen for the last few years, is really a lot of the protocols that were used in call centers to make sure that people were working and being available are really being rolled out to the rest of the organizations. And that's really interesting because people who were in marketing and sales and accounting and product and all of that, IT, weren't really subject to that level of monitoring. And that's really what's very interesting, is because it was our normal and now it's being rolled out, and the reactions are fascinating, and I think long overdue. Because people don't like being surveilled. I mean, honestly, nobody ever liked it. Nobody ever enjoyed it. It was a condition of employment, right? And that's where I think that we really have to be aware of what we're sacrificing when we're surveilling, and that is trust. And that, I think, is really going to be the next hot topic that really comes around, is trust, respect, and psychological safety. How do you push back on not having space within your day, right? So do you really need to be scheduled in back-to-back meetings? Do you really need to have your cameras on every time? Do you really need to have an AI transcript for every single call that you do? Where do you have space and freedom for creativity? And, not every job really rewards creativity, but humans are creative people. Even in call centers, we were creative. I got pushback a lot for being creative.
Yeah,
right?
no, for sure.
So I think that's really the trend that I'm most interested in, is how do people, there's this whole productivity paranoia that's going on, because leaders can't see their people, and they've always been used to being able to see people. How do you make sure that they're actually working? Well, I mean, it's called trust for a reason. And the way that I like to define trust is the Rachel Botsman. She's a researcher from Oxford. She defines trust as a confident relationship with the unknown. So if you are trying to always force and make sure that you know everything, you're not trusting. That's not trust.
Right.
And that's really where, if you step into trust and you're creating the conditions for trust, the only thing you can do is be more trustworthy. So you really have to start looking in the mirror.
Yeah. That aligns very nicely with another topic you recently posted about, is about as the worker, setting your own boundaries. And I think you posted about specifically, the challenges of setting your own boundaries when you're working from home with people in the home that are not part of your work team. But do you also see now all those people that were all of a sudden that weren't necessarily always working from home, were then forced to work from home, having to learn the hard way? I definitely struggled with that, setting boundaries and getting, my life back into a healthy balance, saying no to every meeting request, and finding yourself, in the 2 seconds between two calls, trying to do 15 emails, going to the washroom, get a new coffee, say hi to your wife, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now that those people that have been pushed, hopefully in a trusting relationship or partnership with their team and with their manager, do you see that people in the modern hybrid way, and maybe even return to office, pushing back on those boundaries as well? I think you mentioned earlier, like, people are finally pushing back to certain things and it's well overdue. What are you seeing that people are doing?
So, I mean, there's a lot of conflict right now just because a lot of this is all worldview and mindset,
Right.
right? So, and it's all of the people that surround you in your life, right? So, like my husband, for example, is a contractor. He does home renovations, and like he doesn't use computers for his work. I
Right.
mean, he might here and there, but that's not his primary tool, right?
Right.
So he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand the desire to be connected online. He doesn't understand that it can be stressful. Has no concept of it. And my kids, honestly, when they need an answer, they're like, oh, it's just going to be quick. But it's like, it's that cognitive interruption, right?
Exactly.
Yes, I'm shifting my focus, and it's identity as well, right? So you're shifting from professional setting to home setting, and shifting back, and it interrupts your flow. It interrupts your productivity. But it's also, you're getting a lot of feedback that's unsolicited from people about how you should be successful in your work, right? And that's where you start getting, people who had always worked in the office. You show up early to meetings, you dress a certain way, you go out for lunch, you stay late, you go out for drinks, all that stuff. That's how you were successful pre-pandemic, right? That was, pretty standard advice. But that's not really the way things work anymore, right? So how do you become successful these days? Well, nobody really has a really clear answer on what's going to work. Most of the time you're not seeing people, unless you actually have to be in the office and they happen to be there that same day, right? And that needs to be coordinated. It needs to be intentional. Some companies are defaulting to the mandated anchor days. I'm not a big fan of that because I really think it depends on the redundancy and the resiliency of your role, right? Like, how do you work together? Is your role actually creative? My role was never dependent on the other people, right? My clients were 3,000 miles away, even pre-pandemic, for decades, right? I never saw the people who I worked with the majority of the time. The people who were on my team, it was almost like it was a container. So we had a place to slot us into the org chart, right? So we had team meetings, but it was like just basically to share information and just say that the manager had done their job.
Right.
It was a checkbox activity. So really, what does teamwork mean? And there's a redefinition really of what that means, what leadership means, and how we proceed going forward, right? And not everybody's willing to let go of the mindset and the worldviews that they held before the pandemic.
Right. So this for me sparks sort of a question that not only the last thing you said, where people are sometimes, hanging on that the world hasn't changed, or, we kind of went on hold. And regardless of whether everybody did their jobs really well and the company is very successful or not, now it's trying to get back to the same old, same old. But at the same time, I think you used the term redefinition, and I love that term because we're using the same words, but they mean different things in time. For me, that also aligns with the skill sets that you need to be successful in a job. And in previous conversations in this series with different people, this has come back where, especially when we look at new technology, the explosion of AI, in tomorrow's world, will being able to prompt properly be as table stakes on a resume or on a job description, I should say, as having excellent communication skills or, proficiency with PowerPoint and Excel. From your angle, from your view, these mindsets of how to work in a modern world, how to be a leader in that, do you already see or expect to see some of those things coming up more and more when it comes to job requirements, like the profile people are going to look for, that there's going to be specifics about how to do this well? Because you don't often see it today. Like when you see a job description today, it's, good communication skills, a certain degree, X amount of years experience, and then knowing how to, write and speak in English and French or what have you. But we don't see a lot just yet. More of those advanced forward-thinking skills that people say, we need this. This is what we need to have a good profile for our organization, whether you're a team leader or a team player. What do you see and what do you think will happen?
So if you actually fundamentally drill down into that, what you're actually asking for is the skill to really unlearn what it was to be successful in the past and what skills got you there, and then relearn new skills that are going to be fundamental for the future. Right. And that's really that unlearn, learn, continue learning, that growth mindset. And I think, honestly, that is really what people need to focus on is, do you have the ability to let go of what was, learn what is, and then set yourself up for success in the future? And if you can demonstrate that mindset and that skill set, and the fact that you have initiative to realize that things are changing, you're going to embrace change, you're going to be resilient, and you're going to be proactive. I think that's really what leaders are looking for, because we don't exactly know what AI is going to end up looking like, right? So even at Davos this week, the World Economic Forum, that trust researcher that I mentioned earlier, Rachel Botsman, she's talking about the fact that leaders are very clear on what they see as the benefits of AI. They don't really understand how it works, and they don't really understand the risks, right? So, and they have an instinct to control it, which is not unsurprising because they have an instinct to control people as well, right? So what does that look like, right? And fundamentally, it comes down to that trust and respect. And do you have the willingness to learn?
Another thing that you talked about recently, and a lot of people were talking about it, was that video from WebMD's leadership, where it's like, hey, I have to come back to work. It's not a negotiation. This is what it's like. And
filmed on a green screen.
Yeah, exactly. Now, moving away from that particular example, but for the people that are watching that are leaders, no matter what level, as an individual leader, like, in the work that you've done and worked with the teams that you've worked with, like, is there a best practice that comes to mind that you can share when you think about having that, authenticity and humility in your leadership and building that trust? Is there something that, you would want to share with all the leaders out there?
So for the first thing is, you can't actually build trust. That implies that you can control trust, and you cannot control trust. You can only earn it or give it, right? So again, you have to earn it in that situation. So you want to be really clear, if you're trying to bring people back to the office, why you're trying to bring people back to the office, because honestly, nobody really buys the whole innovative water cooler chat, all that crap, to be quite honest. And honestly, the WebMD thing, like, that was a threat. Right. And he was very vague and unspecific, right? So threatening your people for a vague reason other than the fact that it's going to be better, like, that doesn't give anybody a complete and believable narrative for why things have to change and go back to what they were, right? So you really want to be clear on, what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, how people can buy into it. You want to give them a clear narrative so that it makes it worthwhile, because there's a cost in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of effort, to actually come back into the office and add a commute back into your day, right? So people they have to change their lives around really to accommodate that, right? So you have to help them understand why it's worth it. And you have to build up a story that helps them buy into your vision. Right. And if you're really not being clear and, telling stories that are compelling, people aren't going to trust you. They're not going to buy in. Got it?
Awesome. I got it.
If we are talking about AI or technology overall, or we need different skills and we need different competencies, and to do things different we need other knowledge and skills. By lack thereof, we end up doing just more of the same.